I think I think this evening we stand at a hinge in time. It's a moment of Kairos rather than chronos. It's a moment of decision. Not the chronos, the chronology, the slow tick of events, but Kairos, the moment of decision. It's a distinction that is in Greek. It's not particularly in English, but it should be. The Alaska encounter produced no ceasefire, only atmosphere and questions. And Washington has produced something rarer in this war: poise and warmth. Listen to President Zelensky sitting at the table, surrounded by the European leaders and Trump, speaking in English without notes, praising a very good conversation and highlighting three tangible tracks: security guarantees, prisoner exchanges, including the abducted children, and he thanked Trump's wife for her letter, and the leader level talks on the most sensitive territorial questions. The tone alone shifted the weather, helped along by a light exchange about suits that recalled February's fracas and marked a deliberate reset. Indeed, the question about suits was asked by the same journalist who asked whether President Zelensky was wearing the right gear in February. And Zelensky pointed out that he's changed his suit, but the journalist hasn't changed his. There are broadly two serious takes here, and I was urged by people making comments to look at Vlad Vexler's piece, and Vlad is Vlad is always very clever and very humorous, and he talks about epistemic caution. Vexler argues that many Western reactions over-index on memes about Putin's stern mask while underweighting the shy, awkward, sometimes playful persona that long-time Russian observers recognize. On that psychological profile, the Alaska mannerisms were perfectly compatible with the real man. The lesson is not body double forensics, but a warning: do not let political analyses degrade into entertainment. Know what you would need to know before you claim certainty. That is certainly one take, but at the same time, I think it is important to be aware of the claims which are made, and to be aware that Putin doesn't like to meet people who haven't been vetted and who haven't been isolated for 2 weeks. He is extremely germ phobic, and there's a lot about the meeting in Alaska which doesn't quite stack up. Jason J. Smart's opinion, he grants that doubles are a running rumor as well, and then layers in Putin's documented germ avoidance and bunkerized choreography to argue that it's plausible a double would be sent to a US military base given the personal risk. He also points to Japanese face and voice recognition claims as suggestive, if contested, that Putin has many doubles, and to the long history of identical offices that Putin inhabits, and the his fear of traveling by plane. The thrust is not cosplay, it's that the Kremlin has made deniability into a habit, and a useful control is the record. The Kremlin has repeatedly denied doubles, and independent tests have sometimes found very high facial similarity in supposed double images. In other words, the dossier is mixed, and certainty is elusive. What the double debate means now, I think is very interesting, is if there is a trilateral meeting, uh, is it possible? Is it possible that Putin will not actually be there? Is it possible that the meeting with Trump, that Trump was aware that Putin was unreal? Is that why the meeting was truncated? Reuters reports Alaska yielded no deal and floated a similar Russian ask: fix the line largely where it is if Kyiv concedes Donetsk, which Ukraine has refused. Washington's follow-on meeting focused instead on security guarantees and humanitarian wins, while teeing up leader-level talks on the hard questions. That sequencing matters. It means any trilateral would start with serious questions rather than a photo finish. And the second issue is the optics. The Alaska images were stiff, the Washington images were human. Zelensky's closing, his gratitude for US leadership, a map on the table, a practical list, guarantees that work for years, getting people home, keeping Europe aligned, projecting steadiness. The suit banter this time served Kyiv. He controlled the room without the absurd theatricality of deceit. The third point is the authority question. Could a fake Putin negotiate with authority? International law gives a crisp starting point. Under Article 7 of the Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties, heads of state are presumed to represent the state without needing full powers. But that presumption depends on identity. And if the person is not the head of state and lacks proper authorization, any signature could be regularized only if Moscow subsequently confirms it under Article 8. In other words, even if a perfect double were to sign a document, that would not bind Russia unless Russia later chose to be bound, which means the real power is still political consent in Moscow, not an actor's likeness at the table. And this leads to a practical rule for Washington and Kyiv to insist on written modalities that force Moscow to confirm. Frameworks, not vibes. Instruments that require immediate countersignature in Moscow or rapid legislative concurrence prevent who signed what from becoming the next fog machine. If the Kremlin refuses that confirmation, you have your answer before the ceasefire unravels. Now, Vexler is right to worry that we get seduced by the theatre, by the puppetry, yet the theatre has effects. It has three big effects on deterrence. If partners suspect sleight of hand, they hedge. If Russians suspect the leader is off stage, factional jockeying increases. Either outcome weakens any ceasefire's shelf life. On verification, modern negotiations live on verification protocols. If the public debate fixates on ears and jawlines and cheekbones, it can distract, or it will distract, from verifiable items like prisoner lists, munition flows, and inspection regimes. On narrative, the body double meme functions as a solvent. It tells Russian audiences nothing is real, everything is staged. And that corrodes accountability at home, precisely when Russians will soon face a choice about the war's real cost. And here Smart's risk lens and Vexler's psychological lens can be reconciled. Assume both the real man's shyness and the system's love of opacity, then design talks that are resilient to both. One vivid Alaska detail captured the moment. Despite a narrow sanctions carve-out for the meeting, the Russian delegation reportedly had to offer cash for jet fuel because banking channels were unusable. That image, a cash-stuffed workaround on a US runway, is not proof of victory or collapse. It's proof that the underlying constraints remain, which is why Moscow would seek a deal that freezes lines but frees trade. Leadership is not a costume, but it has style. And in February, the combative exchange about Zelensky's clothes became a proxy for contempt. In August, that same trope has been flipped. Zelensky wore the suit, made the joke, and then talked maps, children, prisoners, and multi-year guarantees. He was the star president that I think can only be matched by someone like President Reagan. He generated alignment, US and European, without airbrushing the hard parts. That is what real authority looks like, and he has charisma. If there is a real Putin ready to make hard choices, then yes, he should appear, because only the real sovereign can authorize the cascade of confirmations any durable framework will need. If there is not, then Russia faces its Kairos, its time, its decision moment, and the decent course is admission and renewal, a transfer of authority that allows a new leadership to sign, confirm, and live with the peace it makes. It is time for regime change. It is time to admit that Putin's day is gone. And either way, the trilateral's viability depends on three tests. The substance that beats the show. Agreements must be anchored in written security guarantees rather than personality and fear. That is why the White House language matters more than the Alaska posturing. Confirmation beats confusion. Every step that could be questioned later, from ceasefire terms to exchange lists, should require explicit, rapid confirmation in Moscow. That neutralizes the double gambit at the source. And warmth beats fear. The party that can speak to human stakes without menace attracts the coalition it needs. On current form, Zelensky owns that register. Putin invites speculation about disease and deceit. And politics is not therapy, but tone is a strategic asset, and Zelensky has it, and Putin doesn't. So yes, this is Kairos. This is the time. This is the decisive moment. Either the Kremlin puts a real signature behind real commitments, or the rest of us should treat the Alaska footage as a curiosity and keep building a settlement that doesn't depend on one man's theatricality, on one man's puppetry. The world has had enough of that sort of puppetry. The puppetry of the Putin. There wasn't there a show in Edinburgh that started something like the puppetry of the Putin, and two people came out and played with their Putin or something. It's time for law, for confirmation, and a peace that can be verified long after the cameras are turned off. It's time for Putin to go.